Chapter 19, Part 1 of Aeroplanes and Dirigibles of War by Frederick A. Talbot. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomcho. Aeroplanes and Dirigibles of War by Frederick A. Talbot. Chapter 19, The Navies of the Air, Part 1. Less than 3 years ago, the momentous and spectacular race among the powers of Europe for the supremacy of the air began. At first, the struggle was confined to two rivals, France and Germany, but as time progressed and the importance of aerial fleets was recognized, other nations, notably Great Britain, entered the field. Germany obtained an advantage. Experiment and research were taken up at a point which had been reached by French effort. Further experiments and researches were carried out in German circles with secret and feverish haste, with the result that within a short time a pronounced degree of efficiency, according to German ideals, had been attained. The degree of perfection achieved was not regarded with mere academic interest. It marked the parting of the ways, the point where scientific endeavor commanded practical appreciation by turning the success of the laboratory and aerodrome into the channel of commercial manufacture. In other words, systematic and wholesale production was undertaken upon an extensive scale. The component parts were standardized, and arrangements were completed with various establishments possessed of the most suitable machinery to perfect a program for turning out aeronautical requirements in a steady, continuous stream from the moment the crisis developed. The wisdom of completing these arrangements in anticipation is now apparent. Upon the outbreak of hostilities, many German establishments devoted to the production of articles required in the infinite ramifications of commerce found themselves deprived of their markets, but there was no risk that their large plants would be brought to a standstill. The government ordered the manufacture of aeroplane parts and motors upon an extensive scale. In this manner, not only were the industrial establishments kept going, but their production of aeronautical requirements relieved those organizations devoted to the manufacture of armaments so that the whole resources and facilities of these could be concentrated upon the supply of munitions of war. In France, the air fleet, although extensive upon the outbreak of war, was somewhat heterogeneous. Experiment was still being pursued. No type had met with definite official recognition, the result being that no arrangements had been completed for the production of one or more standard types upon an elaborate scale comparable with that maintained by Germany. In fact, some 6 months after the outbreak of war, there was an appreciable lack of precision on this point in French military. Many of the types which had established their success were forbidden by military decree as mentioned in a previous chapter, while manufacturing arrangements were still somewhat chaotic. Great Britain was still more backward in the new movement, but this state of affairs was in a measure due to the division of the fourth arm among the two services. A well-organized government manufactory for the production of aeroplanes and other aircraft necessities had been established, while the private manufacturers had completed preparations for wholesale production. But it was not until the Admiralty accepted responsibility for the aerial service that work was essayed in grim earnest. The allocation of the aerial responsibilities of Great Britain to the Admiralty was a wise move. Experience has revealed the advantages accruing from the perfection of homogeneous squadrons upon the water, that is to say, groups of ships which are virtually sister craft, of identical speed, armament, and so on, thus enabling the whole to act together as a complete effective unit. As this plan had proved so successful upon the water, the Admiralty decided to apply it to the fleet designed for service in the air above. At the time this plan of campaign was definitely settled, Great Britain as an aerial power was a long way behind her most formidable rival, but strenuous efforts were made to reduce the handicap, and within a short while the greater part of this leeway had been made up. Upon the outbreak of war, Great Britain undoubtedly was inferior to Germany in point of numbers of aircraft, but the latter power was completely outclassed in efficiency, and from the point of view of personnel. The British had developed the waterplane as an essential auxiliary to naval operations, and here was in advance of her rival, who had practically neglected this line of experiment and evolution, resting secure in the assurance of her advisers that the huge dirigibles would be adequate for all exigencies on the water. Indeed, when war was declared, all the powers were found more or less wanting so far as their aerial fleets were concerned. If Germany's huge aerial navy had been in readiness for instant service when she invaded Belgium, she would have overcome that little country's resistance in a far shorter time and with much less waste of life. It was the Belgians who first brought home to the belligerents the prominent part that aircraft were destined to play in war, and the military possibilities of the aeroplane. True, the Belgians had a very small aerial navy, but it was put to work without delay and accomplished magnificent results, ascertaining the German positions and dispositions with unerring accuracy and incredible ease, and thus enabling the commander of the Belgian army to dispose his relatively tiny force to the best advantage and to offer the most effective resistance. Great Britain's aerial navy, while likewise somewhat small, was also ready for instant service. The British Expeditionary Force was supported by a very efficient aerial fleet, the majority of the vessels forming which flew across the Channel at high speed to the British headquarters in France so as to be available directly military preparations were begun. And the value of this support proved to be inestimable, since it speedily demoralized the numerically superior enemy. France, like Germany, was somewhat dilatory, but this was attributable rather to the time occupied in the mobilization of the Fourth Arm than to lack of energy. There were around 1,500 aeroplanes ostensibly ready for service, in addition to some 26 dirigibles. But the fleet was somewhat scattered, while many of the craft were not immediately available, being in the shops or in dock for repairs and overhaul. During the period of mobilization, the so-called standing military force was augmented by about 500 machines which were acquired from private owners. The aeroplane factories were also overhauled and reorganized so as to be in a position to remedy the inevitable wastage. But these organizations' efforts were somewhat handicapped by the shortage of labor arising from the call to arms. France, moreover, imperiled her aerial strength by forbidding the use of 558 machines which were ready for service. Germany's aerial fleet was of similar proportions to that of her Gallic neighbor, but curiously enough, and in strange contrast, there appeared to be a lack of readiness in this ramification of the Teuton war machine. The military establishment possessed about 1,000 machines, active and reserve, of which it is estimated 700 were available for instant service. During the period of mobilization a further 450 machines were added to the fleet, drawn for the most part from private owners. So far as the dirigibles were concerned, 14 Zeppelins were ready for duty, while others were under construction or undergoing overhaul and repair. A few other types were also in commission or acquired during mobilization, bringing the dirigible force to 40 machines all told. But the greatest surprise was probably offered by Russia. Very little was known concerning Russian activities in this particular field, although it was stated that large orders for machines had been placed with various foreign manufactories. Certain factories also had been established within the empire, although the character of their work and its results and achievements were concealed from prying eyes. In Russia, however, an appreciable number of private aeroplanes were in operation, and these, of course, were placed at the disposal of the authorities the moment the crisis developed. The British and French aeroplane manufacturers had been busy upon Russian orders for many months previous to the outbreak of hostilities, while heavy shipments of component parts had been made, the assembling and completion of the machines being carried out in the country. It is generally believed that upon the outbreak of war Russia had a fleet of 800 aeroplanes in hand, of which total 150 were contributed from private sources. Even the dirigible had not been overlooked, there being nearly 20 of these craft attached to the Russian army, although for the most part they are small vessels. In comparison with the foregoing large aerial navies, that of Great Britain appeared to be puny. At the moment, Great Britain possesses about 500 machines, of which about 200 are waterplanes. In addition, according to the Secretary of the Admiralty, 15 dirigibles should be in service. Private enterprise is supported by the government, which maintains a factory for the manufacture of these craft. During the 2 years preceding the outbreak of war, the various powers grew remarkably reticent concerning the composition and enlargement of their respective aerial fleets. No official figures were published, but at the same time it is a well-known fact that during the year 1913 France augmented her flying force by no fewer than 544 aeroplanes. Germany was no less energetic, the military acquisition in this branch and during the selfsame year approaching 700 machines according to the semi-official reports published in that country. The arrangements concluded for the manufacture of additional craft during the war are equally remarkable. The principal factory in Germany, now devoting its energies to the production of these craft, although in happier days its normal complement of 4,000 men were responsible for the production of another commercial article, possesses facilities for turning out 30 complete aeroplanes per week, according to the statement of its managing director. But it is averred that this statement is purposely misleading, inasmuch as during the first fortnight of the campaign it was producing over 50 aeroplanes per week. It must be remembered that Germany is responsible for the supply of the majority of such craft for the Austrian armies, that country purchasing these vessels in large numbers because in the early days of the conflict it was notoriously weak in this arm. Since the declaration of war strenuous efforts have been made to remedy this state of affairs, particularly upon the unexpected revelation of Russia's aerial strength. End of Chapter 19. The Navies of the Air, Part 1. Recording by William Tomcho.